Hey, Dr. Dixon, Chris Henderson with the informative speech. So here are my cards. A lot of keywords for a lot of information that I will be discussing here in a moment. All right. My visual aid. And everyone confirmed that they can see that very easily. It's basically a metal sign I purchased off of eBay of the abolitionist John Brown. And last is the audience introduction.
Hi, I'm Rosa.
Hi, I'm Dee.
Hi, I'm Jenny.
Hello, Josephine here.
Hi, I'm Jackie.
Hi, I'm Shanice.
How far would you go for a person who you never met or will never know? Let's take it to an extreme. Imagine, would you sacrifice your own life and the lives of two of your own children? Well, one man did just that. And by sacrificing himself and the lives of two of his children, he was able to change the course of history for not just one stranger, but close to 4 million strangers. That man was John Brown, Civil War era abolitionist. Today I'd like to inform you about the significant events of the biography of John Brown. I've been interested in John Brown since I was a young child. His militant action in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, I felt was always an extraordinary cause. I consider myself a hobbyist historian. Over the last decade, I've studied many books on John Brown's life, and to include the significant event of the Harper's Ferry raid, which he committed in the name of the abolitionist movement. There are many experiences in John Brown's life that caused him to embrace the abolitionist cause. However, today I'm going to highlight 2 events. The first event occurred at a childhood age, and the second event occurred when he was a mature adult. And it's because of these experiences that John Brown eventually ended up taking militant actions in the name of the abolitionist movement. And there are several militant actions that John Brown committed in his lifetime. However, today I'm only going to discuss 2 events. And the first action took place in 1856 in the state of Kansas, and the second event occurred in 1859 in the state of Virginia. But first, let's begin by looking at 2 experiences in John Brown's life that caused him to embrace the abolitionist cause. And these 2 events to me show potentially the strongest influences. First experience occurred during the War of 1812 when 12-year-old John Brown witnessed a slaveholder beat a child slave with a shovel. From Jonathan Earl's book, John Brown's Raid on Harper's Ferry, after a 100-mile cattle drive by himself, 12-year-old John Brown lodged with a man who owned his child slave. During his stay with that man, he witnessed him beat that child with a shovel. And according to editor Franklin Sanborn's book, The Life and Letters of John Brown, in 1857, John Brown wrote an autobiographical letter to the son of a financial supporter for the abolitionist cause. In that letter, he described how when he was 12 years old, he stayed with a U.S. Marshal, a man of law, who owned a child slave. And during that stay, he witnessed that man beat the child multiple times. John Brown even described the horrid living conditions that child lived in and the poignant observation of how defenseless that child was because he did not have his parents with him. And the second experience of John Brown occurred in the year of 1837 when a newspaper owner was murdered by a lynch mob. From Tony Horitz's book Midnight Rising, in November of 1837, Eliza Lovejoy, an owner of an abolitionist newspaper entitled The Observer, was murdered by a pro-slavery lynch mob. And during that night when he was murdered, his press was thrown into the river as well. Upon hearing this news at a church meeting, John Brown stood before the crowd and raised his right hand and swore to God that he was going to take any means necessary to destroy slavery. Reverend Edwin Brown, who was the cousin of John Brown, wrote that during a church meeting in Hudson, Ohio, in November of 1837, a memorial service was held for the murdered abolitionist newspaper Eliza Lovejoy. And during that memorial, John Brown stood before the crowd and announced that he was going to dedicate his life to the destruction of slavery. And this was highlighted in the book, A John Brown Reader, edited by Lewis Rockman. And so now I'd like to discuss a couple militant actions that John Brown committed in his life. And as I just stated, there were many influences that led him down the road to take militant action in the name of the abolitionist movement. And the 2 events that occurred was one that was the successful Battle of Blackjack, where pro-abolitionist forces captured a pro-slavery regiment. It was the summer of 1856, and Captain H.C. Pate and a company of pro-slavery supporters scoured the Kansas Territory countryside near the town of Osanomiee looking for John Brown. During this course, they terrorized many local businesses and residents that were pro-anti-slavery. In the book, John Brown, Terrible Saint, David Karshner continues to describe how John Brown was forced to confront Captain Pate and his men. On the morning of June 2nd, John Brown took the offense and attacked Captain Pate's encampment. And after a 3-hour gun battle, Captain Pate was forced to surrender to John Brown. James Redpath, author of the book Public Life of John Brown, extensively details how on the early morning hours of June 2nd, 1856, 26 armed abolitionists split into 2 groups of 13 committed a 2-pronged attack against Captain Pate's pro-slavery encampment. Leading one group, John Brown was able to coordinate both of those groups to create a crossfire down upon the 60 men that formed Captain Pate's regiment, and after a 3-hour engagement, Captain Pate was forced to surrender due to the fact that many of his men either ran off or were wounded. So there was another event, a second event, where John Brown took militant action, where he participated, and that was the capture of the United States Federal Arsenal in Harpers Ferry, Virginia. John Brown was not successful in the Harpers Ferry raid, resulting in him being jailed and executed by the state of Virginia. In John Brown's book, in the book John Brown's Raid by Lorenz Graham, it illustrates how on the evening of October 16, 1859, John Brown and a small group of men were able to seize 2 bridges, an arsenal, and a rifle factory within a couple hours. His men went out into the countryside, kidnapped local slave owners, and freed about a dozen slaves. On the next day, on October 17th, a passenger train was allowed to pass through the town of Harpers Ferry, which was John Brown's biggest mistake because the alarm was soon raised. And the following day after that, on October 18th, on the 3rd day, John Brown was arrested. And in a few weeks, there was a trial. He was convicted of treason and was executed by the state of Virginia in Charlestown on December 2nd, 1859. Author Jonathan Earl touched upon that in the 3 days that John Brown and his men took the town of Harpers Ferry, many hostages were taken by John Brown and his men. Casualties were experienced on both sides, and famous Civil War General Robert E. Lee and the United States Marines overtook John Brown, capturing him alive in a fire engine house. At this time, John Brown had witnessed the death of 2 of his sons in Harpers Ferry, and himself was hanged in December of 1859. So today, I informed you about significant events for the biography of Civil War era abolitionist John Brown, and I'd like to wrap up my discussion now. In conclusion, I focused on 2 experiences in John Brown's life that led him to embrace the abolitionist cause, and I also discussed 2 examples of him taking militant actions in the name of the abolitionist movement. So how did John Brown change the history for almost 4 million strangers? Well, I'm talking about African-American slave population living in the United States in 1859. Many historians and scholars consider John Brown the spark that ignited the Civil War. 18 months after John Brown's execution, the Civil War commenced, and in 1865, the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery forever. So again, I'd like to ask you, how far would you go for a person whom you've never met or will never know? Thank you.
All right. Good job.